If you study theology in a modern Reformed or Evangelical seminary, you will quickly be introduced to a specific framework for interpreting the Old Testament. This framework divides God's law into three distinct categories. First, the moral law, the Ten Commandments, taught as an eternal standard. Second, the ceremonial law, rituals and sacrifices, taught as abolished. Finally, the civil law, Israel's judicial codes, taught as officially expired. It is an exceptionally tidy system. It provides a clean, logical rulebook for modern Christians, making it the default lens for deciding which Old Testament commands to obey and which to ignore. But there is a glaring problem with this framework. The Bible never actually separates the law into these three categories. The prophets and apostles never explicitly label one verse moral and the next verse ceremonial. The heavy categorization you find in modern theology textbooks is entirely absent from the raw, internal witness of the scriptures themselves. To understand why we read the Bible through this grid, we have to look past the Protestant Reformation and trace the historical origins of this exact division. We need to see precisely where tradition replaced the text. If this division is a later tradition rather than a biblical command, our method of interpreting the Old Testament relies on a filter external to the text itself. It shifts the authority from the Word to the framework we use to read it. The modern version of this framework is deeply rooted in the 1647 Westminster Confession of Faith. That text explicitly relies on this threefold division, declaring the ceremonial laws abrogated and the judicial laws expired. But the writers of the Westminster Confession did not invent this. They inherited it from the 13th century. It was Thomas Aquinas who formally codified this division in his Summa Theologica, blending Christian doctrine with ancient philosophy, and Aquinas pulled his framework directly from ancient Greece. The concept of a universal moral law, distinct from specific divine covenants, originated with Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics. Aristotle laid the groundwork in his Nicomachean Ethics, arguing that a rule of justice is natural when it has the same validity everywhere. He built a system where morality could be discovered entirely through human reason. The Stoic philosopher Cicero developed this further. He proposed natural law, a universal moral standard written into nature itself, accessible to all humans through logic, regardless of whether God had spoken an explicit command. This directly contradicts the biblical view of human reason. The prophet Jeremiah writes that the human heart is deceitful above all things. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians that the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God. Scripture insists that fallen human reason is corrupted. It suppresses the truth and rationalizes evil. The moral law pillar of modern theology is built on the philosophical assumption that humans can accurately deduce morality from nature. It is a product of Greek natural law, not the explicit revelation of the biblical text. The Old Testament presents a completely different model. The Hebrew word is Torah, a single unified instructional covenant. Moses does not hand Israel three separate legal codes. He declares, "This is the commandment, the statutes, and the judgments." They are woven into an indivisible whole. We can actually stress test the Greek threefold framework by applying it strictly to specific biblical commands. The command to rest on the seventh day sits squarely inside the Ten Commandments, the supposed anchor of the eternal moral pillar. Yet, because modern practice typically observes Sunday, the Sabbath is quietly shifted over to the ceremonial pillar to justify ignoring it. Look at the appointed festivals in Leviticus 23. Are they ceremonial? Yes, involving worship. Are they moral? Yes, keeping them is covenant obedience. Are they civil? Yes, structuring Israel's national calendar. A single law is simultaneously all three things. The categories collapse under their own weight. They fail because they force a fragmented Greek grid over an interconnected Hebrew covenant. We see this unified model upheld clearly by the New Testament authors. Look at the Epistle of James, chapter 2, verse 10. James writes, "For whosoever shall keep the whole law, and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all." That is pure covenantal language. You cannot offend in one point and be guilty of all if the law is a compartmentalized code where some sections carry no weight. Christ himself addresses this in Matthew chapter 5. He states explicitly that he did not come to destroy the law, and that not one jot or tittle will pass from it. When Jesus says he came to fulfill the law, he is not setting up a mechanism to abolish the awkward parts. Fulfilling the law means living it perfectly, magnifying its deepest intent, and instructing his disciples to walk in it. Christ and the apostles operated on the unified Torah model. They rejected the premise of separable, disposable categories. Treating the law as a collection of separable categories creates a specific set of outcomes in the life of a believer. When you apply this framework, it acts as a theological scalpel. It gives Christians permission to look at massive portions of God's revealed word and dismiss them as permanently expired. The result is selective obedience. We say we only need to follow the moral law, while retaining the authority to decide exactly which scriptures qualify as moral and which are merely ceremonial inconveniences. Jesus identifies the consequence of this behavior in Matthew 5:19. He says that whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Applying an Aristotelian filter to the Bible undermines the authority of the Creator. It allows the created to edit his commands. We have to choose between a hermeneutic built on man-made tradition and one built on the internal witness of Scripture. God's law is one entity. Paul tells the Romans it is holy, just, and good. It is the direct expression of God's own character, and his character does not expire. The new covenant promises in Jeremiah 31 and Ezekiel 36 do not abolish this law. Instead, God promises to write it directly on our hearts, giving us his Spirit so that we have the power to walk in his statutes. It is time to abandon the fragmented categories of scholastic tradition. The Scriptures call us to embrace a unified, Spirit-led obedience to the whole counsel of God.